The era of the concussion in major football is upon us. Today we see the NFL, they act in a certain way that is not familiar to us. We remember the hits and back in the day that we seen with Chuck Bednarik. We see people get knocked out and people would cheer and scream and get excited about big hits, but now not so much. There's a reason for that. People have become knowledgeable about the effects that the brain has whenever it receives trauma from a big hit. But it wasn't too long ago, 10 years, whenever I remember hearing terms like shake it off, walk it off, when you get hit, you know. You hear terms like you got your bell rung, just get back in the game. And there was a lot of players who experienced that thing, and there's a reason for that. And the reason being is that us as players, we had a blind trust in our coaches. You see, the coaches gave us an opportunity to be something that we always dreamed of being. The coaches, they gave us access to benefits that other people don't normally have, and there wasn't anything that a player wouldn't do for their coaches. So whenever you look at situations like you see with the two young men in San Antonio playing football to hit the referee, you have these young men who are told that that referee needed to pay, right? And these two young men went and they blindly trusted their coach, and they assaulted a man because of it. Now, while that's understood, I don't condone that, but the point of what I'm trying to bring out here is that this same blind trust that football players have in their coaches to go and put their bodies on the line, put their walking on the line, their brains on the line, this is the same type of trust that we need to have in God. We need to have a trust, a total reliance on God. That's what faith in God is. So, as we meet here this morning and we break the silence, and we allow God to speak through His Word, we're going to be coming from the book of Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. We're going to be looking at a gospel narrative miracle account in the book of Mark chapter 5. And we're going to begin at verse 21. Verse 21. I'll be reading from the NRSV version. We're going to read the passage in its entirety, and then we'll break it up into sections. Verse 21, it reads, "When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live.' Verse 24, so he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, 'If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well.' Immediately her hemorrhages stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my clothes?' And his disciples said to him, 'You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, "Who touched me?"' He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.' While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, 'Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?' But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, 'Do not fear, only believe.' He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, 'Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. Here we catch up with Jesus in this narrative miracle, and this is immediately following Jesus healing the demon-possessed man, the man who was causing harm to himself and living among the tombs. And Jesus' popularity is beginning to grow. And Jesus comes to the other side of the sea, and there begins to be a big crowd around him. And people are gathering because they're hearing about the great things that Jesus is doing, and they're hearing about, or they're believing that he is what they've been waiting for. Now, we see, when Jesus comes across, we see the leader of a synagogue, right? And his name is Jairus. And this synagogue was like a church setting. And the people would come and they would read scripture and they would read Psalms and they would have somebody interpret the scripture. It was just like a worship service like we would have. And Jairus, the leader of these people, he came to Jesus and it said that he laid or bowed down at his feet. Now that's saying something right there. This man who is in a high position, he came to Jesus in verse 22 and he showed humility. This man who didn't have to come to Jesus, some would believe, this man who held this position came to Jesus and he bowed down before this man who had nothing, who had no home, who had nothing but these followers behind him, these people. This person that had no social status. And we need to understand that social status was important in this time. And he came to Jesus and he bowed down and showed humility. And it says that when he came to him, he began to plead earnestly with Jesus, begging him, "Heal my daughter, because right now she is at the point of death. She is about to die. And I know that if you would just come and lay hands on her, she will be made well." And this is what he does. He comes to him with humility and he says, "I have this urgent need and I need you to fix this for me. I need you to do this for me." And so it says that Jesus went with him. And this crowd that was around him, pressing in on him, they followed as well. And I want you to see, whenever you see the writer of Mark, when he talks about things, he'll interrupt a story. All of a sudden. Because you have this leader of the synagogue, and he's dealing with this issue. And then all of a sudden, in verse 25, you have a woman with the flow of blood, with a hemorrhage problem. And she interrupts Jairus' story. And so it says there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. 12 years. She had been suffering. It says that she had seen several doctors, spent all of her money. She had made no progress. When she went to the doctor, she didn't get better, but it said that she got worse. Some of y'all can relate to that, right? You go to the doctor for a yearly physical, and they tell you got high blood pressure. They tell you got diabetes, or the sugar, as we call it sometimes. And then you go in for a sore throat, and they tell you you come out with cancer, right? That's what this woman was dealing with. She was going to see these doctors, and nothing was getting better for her, and the situation was getting worse, and she was spending up all her money, and she was desperate. She had nothing left at all. Nothing left at all. This woman had nothing left at all, and what she does, she heard about Jesus, just as Jairus had heard about Jesus. And let's look at verse 27. Someone read verse 27 for me, 27, 28.
And when she had heard of Jesus, came to the press behind.
She came and pressed behind. Okay.
And touched his garment.
Verse 28.
For she said, if I may touch of his clothes, I shall be whole.
So what this woman does is, this crowd is around Jesus, and she says within herself, I believe that if I go and I just touch his clothing, that I will be made whole. And I want you to see the comparison between Jairus and the woman who has been dealing with this issue of blood for 12 years is that she too believes. She too believes. But what she does is she makes her way through the crowd. And she knows in her heart that when she touched Jesus' clothing, she'll be made well. So she presses through. And when this happens, it says that her issue is immediately fixed.
That's right.
Her hemorrhaging stopped, and she felt well. And also there was another feeling, and Jesus is the one that feels this feeling, and Jesus feels this power come out from him. And Jesus responds, and he says, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And one thing worth noting here is that when he says this, his disciples around him are saying, they're basically saying, "What are you talking about, Jesus? What do you mean, who touched you? You have this group of people pressing in on you, and you ask, who touched you?" You ask, who touched you? Jesus felt this power leave him. You have this crowd pressing in on Jesus, and yet just the touch of his clothing stopped him in his tracks. What does verse 33 through 35 say?
But the woman,
Okay.
fearing and trembling,
The woman fearing and trembling,
knowing what was done in her,
knowing what was done in her,
came and fell down before
she
him,
came and fell before him
and told him all the
and
truth.
told him all the truth. And he said
And
to her,
he said
what?
unto her,
He said to her,
Daughter,
Daughter,
thy faith hath
your
made thee
faith
whole.
hath made you whole.
Go in peace,
Go in peace
and be whole
and be
of thy
whole
plague.
of thy plague. What he tells her is that your faith is what has made you whole. It wasn't the touching of the clothing. Your faith has made you whole. When you look back at Jairus' situation, he wanted Jesus to come and lay his hands on the girl. But he tells the woman who has been bleeding, your faith. The Greek word for that is pistos, right? And this is a total reliance and a trust in God. And this is to believe to the extent of complete trust and reliance. To believe in, to have confidence in, to have faith in, to trust. This is what's necessary in order to receive the power of Jesus. And so, Mark, we look at verses 35 to 43. I'll read that in its entirety. It says, while he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? These people came to him, telling Jairus, who was interrupted when he came to Jesus in humility, when he earnestly begged Jesus at his feet to heal his daughter, they came to him and told him what he was asking for was over and done with. It was over and done with. I want you to realize that when you have no hope, when the evidence is there, right? You have these people who are friends and close people to Jairus, and he's telling them, your daughter is dead. The thing that you came and sought out this man for, it's no point in doing anymore. So when the world tells you that there's no use, when you see clearly that what you wanted, what you needed, is no use in seeking anymore, Jesus tells us to do something here. Verse 36 says what?
And as soon as Jesus heard,
he overheard them speaking. What did he say?
heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the
He saith unto the ruler.
He saith unto the ruler of the synagogue.
The ruler of the
"Be not
synagogue.
afraid,
Do not be afraid.
only believe."
Only believe. And what he's saying there, he says, do not be afraid. He says, have pistos. Have faith. Have total trust. Have total reliance in me. That's what he's telling him at this point. He said, do not be afraid. Have total reliance. Have total trust in me. And then the company they come through, the company of people without instruction. We see how they respond. Those who are without instruction from Jesus, we see how they respond. So Jesus, he takes Peter, James, and John with him. And verse 38 says, they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, and he saw a commotion. And there you have people, they're crying and they're wailing. These people are out of control emotionally. right? Because of what's just happened. Because they haven't been told by Jesus to not fear. They haven't been told by Jesus to not cry, to not be wailing. They haven't been told this instruction. So Jesus tells them, Jesus had told Jairus, he said, do not be afraid, only have total reliance and trust in me. And this is the reason why we need to watch the company that we keep. Because these people's response to Jesus, when he tells them that the daughter is just asleep and not dead, they laugh at Jesus in verse 40. Their response is to laugh at Jesus. And what happens there? It says in verse 40, and they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, get up. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. Says she was 12 years of age. And at this they were overcome with amazement. I'm here to tell you this morning that when you lack, when you have been waiting on God and it looks as though your situation is done and over with, I'm here to tell you that God can take something that's dead and he can bring it back to life. You see, these people looked at this with amazement, right? But I'm here to tell you that it's something that's simple about a miracle. I want you to understand that when Jesus performs a miracle is simply the creation obeying the Creator. God spoke to this flesh that he made. And he told this flesh, he said, I want you to get up. And not only did she just lift up out the bed, she got up and she began to walk. God can take what it is that's dead in your life and he can make it walk. You can ask just for life and he can make it go beyond that. That's what's seen here. You see, Jairus finally had total trust and reliance in God because he had nothing left to rely on. He had to have total trust in God because the thing that he was asking was gone. This morning I have a short poem to share with you. It says, it's called Go On. It says, one step won't take you very far. You have to keep on walking. One word won't tell folks who you are. You got to keep on talking. 1 inch won't make you very tall. You have to keep on growing. One deed won't do it all. You've got to keep on going. So what I'm saying to you this morning is that we must be a people that not only come to God in a prostrate position, bowing down to him and saying, God, I want you to do this for me. We have to have a total reliance in God. We must do like the woman who had the blood flow of 12 years. We must seek to press through the thing that's keeping us from God. We have to press through the crowd as she did, showing effort, showing perseverance, showing faith. And we have to reach out and say, I believe that you'll make me whole. We have to have the faith of Jairus and say, even when what we seek is dead, God, I believe that you can bring it back and make it even better than it was before. We must have an immovable faith because of our unstoppable God. God, through Jesus, will grant the petitions of those in need if we remain patient, persevere, and have complete trust and reliance in God. Thank you.
Amen.